Welcome to this short FAQ video on protecting your brand in China. Mark, you've mentioned that you wanted to do this type of video for the longest time. Can you give us a little bit of background why?
Well, I think one of the reasons is that the trademark question is a question we get asked almost every week. And it's great to interact with companies and ask questions, but and discuss with them their issues. I just thought it might be easier to prepare this short video and we can send it to those people so that we can have a discussion that really centers on the main thing, because I just get a bit bored of saying the same stuff every week, 2 or 3 times a week. And so it's an issue that affects everybody. So I thought, let's put it in a video and send it to them. So I think the trademark is a bit of an issue. This is perhaps the classic concept, where in this case, counterintuitively, the American company, KFC, has ripped off, the very famous KFG in China. I don't know if it's Kunshan fried something. I don't know what the G stands for. But that's perhaps the classic thing about when people think about trademarks. It's that someone will rip it off. It'll be counterfeit. And that's not what we're really discussing. Although we're not discussing it, it's more fun to discuss it than other things. And so, it's not always that someone will just rip off a one-on-one with your trademark or counterfeit it. But like Uncle Martian, and I'm not really sure if Uncle Martian was serious about doing this or they were just doing this in order to gain publicity, but they decided not to rip off one, but 2 brands. So they put Under Armour's kind of symbol in the middle. And I think even like you can think that Uncle and Under kind of looks a bit similar. And then, to top it off, to make it look a little bit more classy, they decided to put the laurel leaves of Fred Perry. And then just to give it that additional bit of class, they put in a star just to top it off. So that one, I'm pretty sure that, Under Armour prevailed pretty quickly. But these things are all distractions. It's always, it's expensive. And, look, to be fair, if Under Armour and Fred Perry hadn't registered their trademarks in China, they'd probably really be a big battle that would take decades to resolve.
So, Mark, I guess one of the main questions is, how do you go about actually processing the trademark registration? Is this something that a lot of companies will feel familiar with? Is it similar to the way it's done back at their home jurisdiction, or is China a little bit different?
So I think, look, trademarks are local rights. So, or because you have a trademark registered in Germany or the UK or the US, it doesn't help you in China. So similarly, Chinese trademarks will not help you in the European Union or in the US. So it's important to make sure that your trademarks are registered in China. Perhaps the big difference is that China has a first to file system, whereas a lot of other jurisdictions, it's first to use. And at least China's system is more definite. So if you've got the registration, you kind of know you've got it. There are these exceptions, like the well-known exception, but these are difficult to prove and prevail in court. They're very expensive. And I think there wouldn't be many well-known trademarks who are not registered in China by now. So I think you put yourself in a difficult position. Also, bad faith registrations, you might prevail, but you might not, and it might take you 10 years and you might spend a lot of money. So I think the first thing you should really think about is your trademark is, it costs only about $700 or 800 pounds or something, 700 pounds to register it. That's for a 10-year period. You can continue to renew it. Someone could cancel it for non-use, but that doesn't really happen with any of our clients. The application will take about 12 months. And that's mostly because of the opposition period and things like that. So, in essence, it's a relatively mechanical process. So file early. What are the things to look out for? One thing is you should do a search to see if it's available or if there's competing trademarks. China's the biggest trademark filing country in the world. So there's lots of trademarks here. So, one issue is, has a pirate registered it? Or has someone registered a trademark very similar to you in the same category? The second issue is that the categorizations are slightly different here than in other international countries. So just check that the classes and subclasses line and they capture all your products. So I think they're the main issues to look at.
I'd like to ask you a question about one of the issues you raised, and that is squatters, or as we put here, a pirate registering your trademark. If a pirate does register your trademark, you've been squatted. What does that mean in terms of your rights to the IP?
Well, I think, look, there's different issues. So I mean, the basic legal answer would be, if if a Chinese company or another company, a foreign company, because a foreign company can own the trademark in China as well, but if a company owns that trademark, well then, firstly, they could actually sue you for infringement. If you're selling a product with that trademark in China, they could sue you. If you're getting a product processed in China or you're having it made in China, they could sue you there. If you're importing or exporting products across the Chinese border, it might be that customs would actually seize your products. And so I think, one of the issues would be you may come under pressure to buy back that trademark for a high price. But, things are complicated. So, we talk about the trademark squatter, and, sometimes people just don't really know how to approach it. I remember a number of years ago, I was in London in a meeting with a company that didn't think they would ever do business in China, because they were a retailer, and what they hadn't expected was this boom in e-commerce. And so they were sending a lot of stuff to China through their e-commerce store, but they found that somebody had registered the trademark, and they said that they had their local law firm look at it, but it's very difficult to resolve, because they spent 1.5 years and they couldn't find this Chinese squatter. And I said to them, well, that's very strange, because the Chinese squatter, he's not the one-armed man from the Fugitive movie. Unlike him, the Chinese squatter, his whole business model revolves around being found. If you can't find him, you can't pay him, and he can't make money. So I was on my BlackBerry under the table and asking our trademark guys to come back to me, because it's actually not difficult to find. And within 20 minutes, I had gotten the email with the guy's name, his address, and even his telephone number. And I said to the English company, well, should we call him? We seem to have located this guy. We didn't phone him. So that's one issue, that's like the typical Chinese trademark squatter. And that guy had registered like 150 trademarks for all kinds of things, from motorcycles to department stores to, all kinds of things. And so his whole business model is register early and sell it to companies. Another type of case. Yep, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just looking at the your trademarked products may be seized by PRC Customs. This ties into counterfeiting, which does come up, is one of the commonly asked questions for us. Can you expand a little bit more on the customs and trademarks?
Yeah, so if you have trademarks in China, you can register them very inexpensively at PRC Customs. And PRC Customs is the only customs body, I think, in the world that checks for trademark abuses on the import, but also on the export. So most countries only check for trademark infringements on imports, but China does it for both. And it's not always just counterfeit. And we occasionally get from clients, like Customs reaches out to us because we're in the paperwork as their contact point. But we sometimes get these things where, a few years ago, there was a container of product in Xinjiang that looked, suspicious to Customs, and that was counterfeit product. But we had another client which had been engaged without my knowledge. Their trademark was, they had a problem with a certain type of trademark with a Japanese company. And, they were trying to get a coexistence agreement in some territories for a long time. But then one day, the Japanese products were stopped at PRC Customs for export. And this gave the leverage for our client, which was a legitimate business, to actually come to an arrangement for coexistence. So they gave the Japanese company coexistence for the trademark in China, and then they were able to get the coexistence in some other territory. So I think that the customs thing is an interesting thing, and it's inexpensive, and it can be quite, powerful.
So we just to sum it up here, the trademark is a bit of a shield in that it protects you from squatters and pirates, but also is a little bit of a shield in case, like the case with the Uncle Martian, when you actually need to enforce your rights too.
Yeah.
Mark,
But just on that point, I think it's worthwhile. So I think on that point, the other thing which is worthwhile mentioning is, yeah, it is not always counterfeit. It can also be that someone's registered your trademark, and they were inspired, but they've built a successful business. And this happens much more often than you think. Perhaps one of the most obvious ones was the founder of this US company had drawn a logo like 20 years ago. I didn't find the logo particularly attractive, but a Chinese person found the logo attractive. And the person had then built in China over a period of time, using that logo as their trademark, essentially the same business. They were doing the same product, which was a beauty-related product. Now, our client only really found out about it was when they found that Sephora had sent them a letter saying that they're pulling all their product off the shelves in China because of this trademark infringement. And what we found was, it wasn't a bad faith squatter, but rather it was somebody who's actually a competitor. And the real issue for the US client was that they would sell maybe 30,000 of this product, or 300,000 of the product in China, but the Chinese squatter was selling like 6 million of this product. So his business was much bigger in China than the American ones. And so what happened was the Americans had to actually rebrand their logo. They were going to do that anyway, but it sped it up for China, because otherwise there was just no way that we were going to buy that trademark off the existing company. So it's not always a simple answer to these questions.
and talking about branding and rebranding, a lot of companies might not have, international companies might not have a Chinese name, on hand. So what are some of the ways that you've seen international companies maneuver in choosing a Chinese name for their brand?
Yeah, so I think, look, most international companies will use the transliteration approach. So they will use words in Chinese that sounds like the international brand's name. And so I think the major issue is maybe 20 years ago, a lot of brands had names that sounded like the international name in Cantonese because Hong Kong was a bigger market perhaps. But nowadays, I think it's really something that sounds good in Mandarin is very important. And probably for the major dialects, something that doesn't sound embarrassing in the other dialects. And then I think the second issue is to make sure that the characters you use, because unlike the alphabet, each Chinese character does have, or most of them do have, an intrinsic meaning. And so you have to make sure that you don't pick characters that would have a very negative connotation. So you wouldn't want to pick some characters that are in Stalin's name or something like that. So try to avoid any negative connotation. And so I guess the problem is for the international brands is China's really the #1 in the world for making up trademarks and names. And so since you actually are restricted by the number of characters, which is more than the alphabet, but it's also a finite number. And secondly, you want names that are short, like 2 or 3 characters. You can do a longer one, but it doesn't sound good in English, but it also doesn't sound very good in Chinese. So, it's a finite number of names. And if you think it's a great sounding name, there is a high risk that someone else has come up with that name. And so it's important to check if it's available first, and also to see whether you think you can get it through the trademark office. And then another issue is, which comes up more than you expect, is that sometimes the brands have very minimalistic names. Like, we had somebody, I think they were called the Milk Company, or they use like a city, like the New York beauty brand or something. And these things, can't be registered. So there you might have to look for a logo, but it's also, it can't be registered by a Chinese company either. So I think you just have to know a bit. And I guess one of the biggest issues is that a lot of people think, I don't have a Chinese name. Everybody knows me, as Sean. But, if you've turned up twice in China, you will have a Chinese name. So better that you pick it and it's a Chinese name that you feel, proud of, rather than a name that someone assigns to you because they're being a little bit mischievous. I remember we had a German lawyer come, and I think by the second round negotiations, all the Chinese referred to him as the old wolf, because it sounded a bit like his name was Wolfgang, and they called him old wolf, and they always laughed their heads off. So that was probably not the best approach.
Going back to that, it all comes down to numbers. If we ran some searches on Baidu on the English name and the Chinese name, and well, Mark, can you walk us through some of these very unexpected results?
Well, I don't think they're unexpected for anybody who kind of lives in China. So, I mean, firstly, obviously Baidu, for people who are not very familiar with China, I guess it is kind of the Google of China. So it's a search engine. And I guess that's something we forget. Something like McDonald's, Chinese consumers will not refer to McDonald's, they will refer to it as Baidanlao. And so, sure, there's 6.5 million hits there in English, but no one knows how many hits there are in Chinese because it maxed out at 100 million. Same with L'Oreal, Starbucks. So I think, it just shows you in a very easy way that it can be a factor of 10 or more how important the Chinese brand is. So if you're selling in China, you've got to respect the Chinese consumer. So give them a name that's easy for them to communicate in, and very importantly, easy for them to remember.
And also remember to register. And
yeah,
that'll be it for this short FAQ video. Of course, this was just an introduction, and your situation will probably require a little bit more look. So if you do have any more questions, please feel free to reach out to Mark. His contact information is on the screen, and look forward to talking to you. Thank you so much for watching.